You walk into the room and your eyes go straight to the loudest person there. They're laughing, they're commanding the table, they are the room. And in the corner, barely noticed, sits someone quiet, still, watching. You file them away as background, harmless, maybe even a little forgettable. That was a mistake, not because quiet people are hiding something dark, but because everything you think you know about power, influence, and danger is built on the wrong foundation. The loudest person in the room is not the most powerful. They never were. And science, history, and the oldest leadership principles in human civilization all agree on something most people learn too late. The ones who say the least often understand the most. Here is why that changes everything. Your brain has a problem. It is wired to equate noise with strength. This goes back further than you might think. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors lived in groups where dominance displays were physical and loud. The one who beat their chest, raised their voice, and took up the most space was often the one who survived. Psychologist Jordan Peterson has written extensively about dominance hierarchies. These are the invisible social ladders every group of humans and most animals organize themselves around. For much of human history, the top of that ladder was occupied by whoever made themselves impossible to ignore. Your nervous system inherited that equation. Loud equals dominant. Dominant equals safe to follow. But something changed. Around 10,000 years ago, human civilization began to shift. Societies grew complex. Survival stopped depending on who could roar the loudest and started depending on who could think, plan, and read others with the most accuracy. The environment changed. The advantage changed with it. And the quiet ones stepped forward. Dr. Adam Grant, organizational psychologist at the Wharton School, has spent years studying what makes leaders effective. What he found disrupted almost every assumption about power. Extroverted leaders, those who dominate conversations and command attention, perform well when managing passive teams, when the team is doing exactly what they are told. But when teams are proactive, when people have their own ideas and energy, the introverted leader outperforms every time. Why? Because the quiet leader listens. And listening is not passive. It is a form of intelligence gathering that the loudmouth can never access while they are talking. Think about the last time you were in a group conversation. Who knew the most about everyone in the room when it ended? Not the one who spoke the most, it was the one who spoke the least. That person collected information about your tone, your hesitations, your contradictions, your real feelings beneath your words, all while you were busy performing for the crowd. This is not accidental. It is a strategy, and history is full of examples. Abraham Lincoln was famously quiet in social situations. Observers who met him before his presidency often came away unimpressed, finding him slow, reserved, almost dull. He rarely raised his voice. He rarely made grand gestures. What they missed was what was happening underneath. Lincoln was listening, processing. When he spoke, those words had been constructed with an internal precision most people will never understand, because they are too busy speaking to ever develop it. When he finally moved, those who had dismissed him realized they had been in the room with something they had completely failed to read. Theodore Roosevelt once said that if you could not say anything about a person after meeting them, they were either a fool or someone whose mind was beyond what you could access. The quiet person in the corner is rarely a fool. There is a concept in psychology called the still water effect. Still water runs deep. The metaphor is ancient, but the science behind it is relatively recent. Researchers at the University of California found that individuals who speak less in group settings are consistently rated higher in competence by outside observers after the interaction has concluded, even when their actual contributions were equal to those who spoke more. The brain, watching from outside the dynamic, respects restraint. It reads silence as depth. The loudest person reads as someone who needs to be heard, and need is not power. The quiet person reads as someone who chooses when to speak. and choice is. Consider what happens when a quiet person finally breaks their silence in a meeting or a conversation. Every head turns, everyone leans in slightly. There is an involuntary attention that cannot be manufactured by the person who has been filling every silence since the conversation began. This is not mystical. It is simple economics. When something is scarce, its value rises. When someone speaks constantly, their words become background noise. When someone speaks rarely and deliberately, each word carries weight that the loud person has already spent. The quiet person has been saving theirs. Dr. Susan Cain, whose research on introversion changed how many people understood personality, found that roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of the population leans toward introversion. These are people who recharge alone, process deeply before speaking, and observe before engaging. Cain's work revealed something uncomfortable for a culture that celebrates the bold and the brazen. Many of the most transformative leaders, thinkers, and creators in history were not people who dominated rooms. They were people who watched rooms, understood them completely, and then acted with a precision that looked effortless because it was anything but. Think about what that quiet person in your office has already mapped. They know who the real decision maker in the room is because they watched where people glanced before answering. They know who trusts whom because they heard which names carried warmth and which carried tension. They know what you are afraid of because they noticed which questions made you hesitate. And they have said almost nothing about any of it. That is not weakness. That is a form of intelligence so sophisticated it has its own name in military strategy. It is called situational awareness. And in combat, business, and relationships, the person with the highest situational awareness almost always wins. Now here is where it gets counterintuitive. Quiet people are often underestimated, and they know it. What looks like disadvantage is frequently leverage. When the world does not expect you to see everything, you see everything. When no one considers you a threat, you are free to move without resistance. When assumptions about you are wrong, those assumptions become the blind spot of every person who holds them. The underestimation is not something the quiet person suffers. In many cases, it is something the quiet person has learned to cultivate. There is a documented phenomenon in negotiation research where the party who speaks less is consistently assessed as having more information, more options, and more confidence than they may actually possess. The silence is read as power, regardless of whether power is present. This means that in almost every social negotiation you have ever been part of, the quietest person in the room has held more structural leverage than they appeared to. They did not need to claim it loudly. The room gave it to them by default. Historical records of leaders who were described as uniquely effective at persuasion often reveal this pattern. They did not shout to move people. They identified the exact right moment, the exact right word, and the exact right silence to let it land. Mahatma Gandhi was famously sparse in conversation. Winston Churchill, who is remembered for his speeches, was described by close associates as a listener in private settings who only deployed language when the moment was precise. Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison with nothing but his own mind for company, emerged with a quality of stillness that those who met him described as one of the most powerful presences they had ever encountered. Not loud, not commanding in the conventional sense, but utterly, completely there. There is something in that stillness that commands more than volume ever can. Your nervous system knows this, even if your cultural programming argues otherwise. Think about the people who have had the most impact on your actual life, not the people who performed for you, the ones who changed you. Were they the loudest, or were they the ones who seemed to understand you more completely than you had explained? The ones who said less than you expected, but hit exactly what you needed. The power in quiet is the power of precision, and precision is always more dangerous than volume. In competitive environments, in business rooms, in social dynamics, in relationships, the person who says exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, consistently outmaneuvers the person who has been filling space with noise. Because noise is predictable, precision is not. And the most dangerous thing you can be in any room is the thing no one has correctly predicted. There is something else quiet people carry that is rarely named. Emotional regulation. Research by James Gross at Stanford University on emotion regulation found that individuals who habitually speak less in social situations tend to score higher on measures of emotional self-regulation. They are less likely to react impulsively. They are more likely to hold a response until it serves their actual interest rather than their momentary emotional state. This is not a small advantage. In almost every high-stakes situation a human being encounters, the person who acts from their deliberate mind rather than their reactive one has a structural advantage that compounds over time. The loud person has told you how they feel about every situation. The quiet person has told you almost nothing. And when the moment of real consequence arrives, you cannot read them. You do not know which way they will move. You have not seen their ceiling or their floor. That is the most precise definition of dangerous, not threatening, not aggressive, genuinely, structurally unreadable. And unreadable is powerful. So what does all of this mean for you? If you are a quiet person, you have likely spent years being told to speak up, to take up more space, to be more like the person filling the room. What no one told you is that the room has already noticed you in ways you have not been given credit for. The weight you carry in your words, the depth that comes through your silence. The fact that when you do speak, people actually listen. The advantage was always there. You were just taught to see it as a flaw. And if you are someone who speaks freely, who fills silence easily, who takes up space without thinking about it, consider what you may have missed. Every room you have been in, there was someone watching, listening, mapping the terrain. They were not forgettable. They were the most important person in the room, and you thought they were in the corner. The loudest voice does not win. The most understood one does. And understanding only ever came to those who were willing to be quiet enough to receive it. You walked into the room and your eyes went straight to the loudest person there. You never noticed the one who was watching you the whole time. Now you will.